are in our discussion series called Leaving Egypt. We've been looking at ancient stories of an enslaved people that God carried out into freedom. And we've been saying that these ancient stories connect to us, and they actually do apply because slavery is a reality people live with every day. Now, we could certainly talk about the very real slavery. A lot of statistics show that there are people that are in slavery now, more people in slavery now than at any point in history. But also there's this deeper slavery that we're referring to. There's things like people who are addicted to drugs and alcohol, and they're enslaved to that addiction. There are people who are enslaved to a way of life. They are enslaved to systems of oppression and violence, and sometimes we feel like we are just absolutely trapped in something. And I would say that there's a deeper spiritual slavery, right, from which we all need freedom, and that freedom leads us to live free and full every day. And so when we talk about leaving Egypt, we're looking at Egypt as this thing that enslaves you. We're connecting it to the thing that enslaves us now, but also that deeper spiritual enslavement from which we've all been made free. And so we said week one, we looked at Passover, and this Passover pointed to this way out. There's a way out. That thing that you're enslaved to, that thing that you are tied down to, that thing that you can't seem to break free of in your life. I'm here to tell you there's a way out. And we looked at the story of Passover, and we saw that Passover points us to the person and the work of Jesus. And what God did through Moses during Passover for Israel, God did through Jesus for the world in his death on the cross. And as we saw in the video, his resurrection, which brings us something new. And there's a way out. And that's some good news for us today. So that was week one. That was our idea worth discussing. And then we moved into the process. This way out has a bit of a process. We're going to look at 4 steps, 4 journeys, 4 paths, 4 sets of questions that we ask ourselves as we journey out into freedom, as we leave Egypt. And the first step is being taken out. First step of liberation is being taken out. And we said that we asked the question, where are you locked in slavery? And are you willing to hear God's voice of liberation? We said because freedom begins by answering the call of the liberator to be liberated. That you are being called out of the thing. Now, I often wondered how many people after the Passover or even participate in the Passover that because they just didn't believe. They didn't believe that they could be free. And that this process to them was maybe even unimaginable. And maybe that's where you are today. But liberation, freedom begins by answering the call of the liberator to be liberated. And we said this, it's a process. Liberation was about getting God's people out of Egypt, but also getting Egypt out of God's people. There was this thing that they were ingrained to, this psychological slavery that went along with the very physical slavery that they were trapped in. But we saw that God worked in miracles and pulled them out, and they answered the call of the liberator to be liberated, and they began this path of freedom. And we looked at that and we connected that to ourselves. And then last week we had an amazing laundry project on Saturday. We helped 41 families, about 580 loads of laundry. And if you give to that, and if you served at that, we just want to say thank you for all that you did to make that possible. Again, a very scary weekend for people, and yet we were able to kind of be a bright shining light through the laundromat at that time. And then to this week, we're going to continue the process, and we're going to look at our next step of liberation, and that is to be delivered. That God was going to, he told him he was going to take them out, but then he was going to deliver them from something. And here's our questions. Where are you in the desert wilderness unto death? What about you needs to die? You see, one way of being in the world needs to die before something more meaningful can be resurrected. And maybe you're in the middle of that process. You feel like the things that you were so sure of, you're not sure of anymore. Maybe the faith that you grew up with isn't the faith that you're currently experiencing. Maybe there's some real deconstruction and some real death that is taking place in all of that. Well, as this story of slavery has been used to connect to many enslaved people throughout history, in the American history of slavery, the Black community that was being liberated had this wonderful word that I think is going to help us today in our discussion. And it's this word, uplift. Here's what it was. Uplift was the process by which the emancipated African American community would move from slavery to self-realization. And I love the word uplift. This idea that we were here and that's not where we belong. We need to uplift together. And there were different views on how to do this in that time and kind of this rebuilding era. But the important thing was what they knew was that their real full freedom wasn't just going to be handed to them overnight, that it would be a process to move from slavery to self-realization. Zora Neale Hurston, an author and filmmaker, said it this way. She said, "Mama exhorted her children at every opportunity to jump at the sun. We might not land on the sun, but at least we would get off the ground." Right? And if you look at her work, the power of humans to imagine life as other than it is what drove her plot lines. And it's what drove her life. This ability for human beings to imagine life as different than it is. Maybe that's where you're stuck. Maybe you can't imagine what's next, what's on the other side of freedom. Maybe you can't imagine life being different than it is right now, and you feel stuck and enslaved. Well, I'm here to tell you that you could be delivered and that there's a way to do that, and it's this right here. Imagination fuels emancipation. One of the first steps, maybe your next step, is to imagine a world different than you're currently experiencing. And so what I want to do is I want to take this story of the Israelites and their journey out of Egypt and the journey of getting Egypt out of them. And I want to take it, I want to look at it through the lens of this idea of imagining a new way of being in the world. So from slavery to self-realization. Here's what's happened so far, right? The Passover, they're free, they're let out of the land. Pharaoh changes his mind, he chases them. They're stuck between the Red Sea and they're stuck between Pharaoh's army. The Red Sea parts in a miracle and God says, get up and do something about your life. And they get out, they get through to the other side of the Red Sea. The Red Sea comes crashing down on Pharaoh's army. There's a huge wind, but they got to walk through the wilderness, through the desert. And they get to a point where they don't have any water, or there's a place of water, but it's bitter, and then God provides sweet water that they can drink. And then they hit their next trial and they get hungry. And them being thirsty was crucial to their life, and they kind of needed that, and that was a good thing. But being hungry incites a whole new set of. Have you ever been hangry? Right? Like you're so hungry, you're angry. And so this incited something in there. They began to complain. God had already provided. He provided a way across the Red Sea. He provided water for them, but now they're hungry. And the kids are probably crying. The adults are feeling hunger pangs. And this is where we pick up in the story. Look how quickly they shifted their story. In Exodus 16, it says this. This is their general complaint from the from the Israelites. If only the Lord had killed us back in Egypt. If only we could have just died back in Egypt. That was their mindset. This is where they had come. They were so hungry. They were so hangry. They were so at a point of death. Oh, if only the Lord had killed us back in Egypt, they moaned. There, we sat around pots filled with meat and ate all the bread we wanted. Right? So at least our bellies were full. We were enslaved, but at least we felt okay and our bellies were full. It says, but now you have brought us, and they're talking to Moses and his brother Aaron, you have brought us into this wilderness to starve us all to death. And here's our shift. Or I'm sorry, here's the story continues a few verses later. It says, so Moses and Aaron said to all the people of Israel, by evening you will realize it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. In the morning, you will see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your complaints, which are against him, not against us. I like how they point that out, by the way. Like we're just following him. So if you're complaining, it's him, it's not us. It's a good leadership thing sometimes. Then Moses added, the Lord will give you meat to eat in the evening and bread to satisfy you in the morning, for he has heard all your complaints against him. What have we done? Yes, your complaints are against the Lord, not against us. And here's what I want us to understand. This move from slavery to self-realization had to imagine a shift in dependency. A shift in dependency. They could only see a world in which their slave masters were also their providers. How are we going to be provided for any other way but by our slave masters? And they have to shift in dependency. Think about the thing that is trapping you right now, that is enslaving you, that you feel like you've got a chain around your ankle. Is there a way for you to imagine life without that thing? Depending on that thing? Gosh, maybe it's food. Maybe it's a worldview. Maybe it's a political party. Maybe there's some kind of safety and security that you've imagined around you, and you're starting to see that crumble, and you're not sure where your dependency lies. I think that's what you see how quickly they wanted to run back to Egypt and let us die there. At least we could die with full stomachs. And God's trying to say, no, I'm trying to shift you into a new way to be dependent on something else than your slave masters. One thing I know about addiction and the experiences of abuse and the way that they last in our lives is sometimes we don't know how to shift our dependency to anything else because we've depended on it so deeply and for so long. And this is a very real issue, is a real issue with them. And we see that God is trying to give them a way to imagine someone else providing for them. Let's continue. It says, then the Lord said to Moses, look, I'm going to rain down food from heaven for you. So Moses tells, hey, listen, God, here's the complaints of the people. And God says, look, I'm going to rain down food from heaven on you. Each day, people can go out and pick up as much food as they need for that day. They're going to have enough. I will test them in this to see whether or not they will follow my instructions. So he's going to provide for them. But there's going to be specific instructions. He said, I'm going to test them to see if they can follow that. Why? It's a shift in authority. A shift in authority. You see, a shift from this authority that led them and instructed them and enslaved them and often beat them, commanded them, ordered them. But it wasn't for something for their good. It was for the good of the oppressor. It was for the good of those who were enslaving others. And God was giving them this new picture. I'm going to give you some instructions. There's freedom under authority, but there's a new way to be led and instructed that is for your good. None of us really shudder or balk or move away from following leadership when we know that their instructions, their leadership, what they're doing, what they're saying is for our good. We want to fall in line with that because we know it's for our mutual benefit. And what we see here is God moving them. I'm going to give them instructions. Let's see how they do with this, because they need to imagine a new authority in their life, a new way of being free under the authority of God and not under the authority of slave masters, a leader. And I believe this is one of the reasons why I follow Jesus the way I do. I believe that Jesus is the kind of leader who is leading us for somewhere for our good, not for his good. It is for our good that Jesus is leading us into new life. I think that's what God was doing here. So now, what he's going to do in these instructions, he's going to set up the Sabbath day. And in Exodus, this Sabbath day, the seventh day of rest, is connected to the Genesis story that we heard about in the video earlier. And God's going to give them enough on the sixth day, not just for that day, but for 2 days. And they're to rest, to stay home. And God's like, let's see what happens with these sets of instructions, that for 6 days you're going to gather. And on that seventh, I want you to rest. Let's continue to read. It says, some of the people went out anyways on the seventh day. I mean, if we're honest with ourselves, how many of us would have been the ones to go out on the seventh day, right? Like it just like maybe you're that skeptical of authority, right? Maybe that's you. And no, you go out on the seventh day. It says, but they found no food. There was nothing there. The Lord asked Moses, how long will these people refuse to obey my commands and instructions? Now, these were brand new commands. God's like this rhetorical question: how long is this process going to take for them to move from slavery to self-realization? How long is this process going to take for them to fully trust me? And I think God asks us the same question sometimes, but with a compassionate, caring heart. How long is it going to take us to really trust God? Because I know in my life, I like to think that I have faith and I trust God in all things. But there are times, and I think we're living in some of those times, where there's some real fear, real anxiety, and real interruption to my ability to trust God. He says this sentence right here. This is so important. Listen to this. He says, they must realize, they've got to get to a place. They must realize that the Sabbath is the Lord's gift to you. That this is a gift. This day of rest is something special. It's something other than the other 6 days a week. That is why he gives you a 2-day supply on the 6th day. So there will be enough for 2 days. On the Sabbath day, you must each stay in your place. Do not go out and pick up food on the 7th day. So the people did not gather any food on the 7th day, right? So eventually they get there, and we see this was a shift in reality. This is a shift in their reality. You're like, Jeremy, now you're getting really existential with something that was pretty basic. This is about gathering food and God providing enough or not. It's like, I think there's more. That's the way I've always read this story. And I think there's something deeper here that God was doing. As he moves them from slavery to self-realization, as he is not just getting them out of Egypt, but Egypt out of them, I think he is showing them a new way to be human in the world, to move from a human doing to a human being. They were slaves. They were dictated to. Every day was a work day. Every day they were told and commanded what to do and how to do it. And they worked like machines every day. God's saying, now we're going to take one day, this day that's a gift for you. I'm going to provide for you in 6 days so that you can have a 7th to rest, because it matters. It's important. This was a move from a worldview of production to a worldview of presence, to simply being in the world, enjoying life, the life that you have. And these kinds of shifts in our thinking require imagination. God was helping them to see a new way of being in the world. And why was he doing that? Because imagination fuels emancipation. If today you cannot imagine a different world, right? When you're about to die, you're feeling alone and broken. The way you're living no longer works for you, or the way of handling your money no longer works for you. The way of handling these relationships no longer works for you. You feel trapped. When you've gotten to the end of yourself, you know that freedom is possible. Imagination, your ability to imagine life as other than it is, it's what's going to fuel that process for you to take next steps out of slavery in that thing in your life.